We're coming up on a very exciting time in the Juno mission where the Juno spacecraft, tomorrow evening, in fact, just under 30 hours from now, is going to be inserting into a highly elliptical polar orbit around the planet. And what I'd like to do in this video is give you about a 15-minute demo of the NASA EYES application, which is what you're seeing on the screen right now, which has a Juno mission module in it. And we're going to be exploring that module. Although the app itself is really exciting. On the Science versus Universe Facebook group and also with my own two T's, Science 2Ts, we love to watch either in real time or non-real time. We love to watch certain missions going back as far as the Curiosity rover landing on Mars several years ago, and also just last year the Pluto flyby using NASA EYES. It's a really great resource for visualizing these missions in space. So let's start with where you can get the NASA EYES application. The Eyes on Juno simulator is specifically available here at eyes.nasa.gov/eyes-on-juno.html. And this is a Windows and Mac application that you can download and install. Very small download, actually. And once you run it, you'll see there's three main modes where you have eyes on the Earth. You can ride along with various NASA satellites and be watching what's occurring on Earth and what they're measuring. You can strap yourself onto any of the various spacecraft and rovers exploring the solar system. You can go see what the Curiosity rover is up to, for example. And you can also look at some of the data that's come back from the Kepler mission and other exoplanet discovery missions. So you can look at where the exoplanets are and what they're like in our immediate galactic neighborhood. But we're going to be focusing solely on the Juno mission module in this demonstration. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And within a few moments, we should get into what's called the cinematic view, where it's going to give us kind of a view of where Juno is right now. You'll see that local time here is July 3rd, just coming up on 2 p.m. here in Arizona, which is also on the same time as Pacific time right now. And we see that even though Juno is about 1 million miles distant from the planet is starting to loom quite large. We have some controls here. For instance, if we click and pan, if we click and drag the mouse, we can go left and right, or we can go up and down as we see fit. We can also use the scroll wheel to go in and out. So we can change our point of view at any point. We can look back towards the sun. There's the sun. The Earth is going to be one of these bluish kind of things around here. And this is showing us real time what the craft is doing, and it's spinning at about 2 revolutions per minute. And it's pointed to the sun for the very simple reason that that's how it keeps itself powered via these solar panels. In fact, throughout almost all of its mission, it will be pointing towards the sun and spinning in this way to stay charged. The mission is designed to be in that spinning state, so as it gets close to Jupiter, the various sensors kind of sweep over the surface of Jupiter and also take measurements of the magnetosphere and the radiation belt. So let's go now and click on, down here we have a full screen mode that we could get into if we wanted to. Let's go and click on Explore, which will give us more details about what we're seeing. So in Explore mode, and let me adjust the view a little bit, there we go. We'll see we have more details like the distance to Jupiter measured in miles. So we're a little bit over 1.1 million miles. We are, as we get closer to Jupiter, this speed will gradually increase to about 129,000 miles an hour. That's because we're kind of falling into the gravity well of Jupiter. We're falling towards Jupiter, basically, under free fall. And the velocity relative to the Earth and Jupiter are also in motion, so these don't have to be necessarily equal to one another because they're on different paths. And in fact, Jupiter is moving in its orbit towards us. We'll see this. We're actually a little bit ahead of Jupiter. Jupiter is kind of moving towards us. You can think of the craft as meeting Jupiter, or you can think of Jupiter kind of coming along in its orbit to meet the craft. They're both one and the same. And we can see we're just under, looks like we're about 29.5 hours from the orbital insertion, which is the next major event coming up, where Juno, this is happening tomorrow night, where Juno is actually going to enter orbit with Jupiter. In this mode, we can get back to the cinematic view by clicking right here, but in this mode we have various ways of changing our view. This goes back to basically the view we started with, which I changed because I rather see Jupiter. We can also go very far above Jupiter. We can kind of see how Jupiter is moving up to meet with the craft. And we can even go further back, and we can see all the way up, so you can see all of the orbits of the planets. And here we have in this mode, the Jupiter craft and Jupiter are almost lined up on top of one another. So this is probably the most useful view, with a little tweak like that. You'll notice that the units here are given in English units by default. I'm running this from the United States, so that comes up as the default. If we'd like, we can go to controls here, and one of the controls is toggle units right here, and that will switch us into scientific units or world metric units. So we're now seeing everything in terms of millions of kilometers, kilometers per hour, and seconds and hours, and so on. If you had 3D glasses, you could also you could select this mode, and then the view would be presented in 3D, which is pretty cool. It sounds like I might have to score 3D glasses at some point to make use of this feature. That's a very cool feature. And we also have, let me turn that off, we also have the ability to go back to eyes on the solar system, so we can get out of this module and return back to the main module if we'd like. We also have up here various panels we can go to look at the specific phases of the mission. The Juno mission overall is actually really exciting because it shows the various stages from launch to the kind of slingshotting move that they had to make to allow Juno to get all the way out to Jupiter with its rather limited main engines, and the Jupiter orbit insertion, which is the next thing we're going to look at, occurring tomorrow night. You can look at the science of Jupiter. That's a very exciting panel. And you can also examine the spacecraft. So let's actually look at the Jupiter orbit insertion in more detail. That's available here. And let me switch back to English units, because that's more what I'm familiar with. And let's look at the Jupiter orbit insertion, which is occurring tomorrow night. So we'll see when we go into that. This actually goes into a time frame a few hours ago. So we just passed kind of where we are. We're roughly right here. And this kind of happens pretty quickly, but the craft is first turned towards the sun, then it turns in such a way that it's lined up to where it's going to fire its rockets. It then starts spinning at 6 revolutions per minute instead of the normal 2. That's to stabilize the craft while the burn is occurring. You can see now it's actually falling kind of very, very steeply along the pole. It's going to skim within 3,000 miles of the planet. And now it's starting a 35-minute burn. Let's actually turn on a couple of things. We're going to turn on the radiation field, and we're going to also look at the auroras. The design of this path, this trajectory, is so that it will actually skim underneath the radiation belts as close as about 2,700 miles to the surface. And while it makes its burn, it's slowing down. So you can see the engine, it takes a little while for it to have an effect because it's still being pulled towards Jupiter. Now also, because we're moving away from Jupiter, this is slowing down greatly. But the combined effect of that burn is such that it will slow down and cause the craft to be captured into the orbit of Jupiter. And as you can see, we skimmed underneath the radiation belt, and now we're seeing the aurora. Well, that was so exciting. I'm going to have to replay it, I think, from the beginning. Now these rates, you see how the time rate is kind of changing. These rates have all been pre-programmed by NASA to make this phase kind of most interesting. But if you want, you can go and slow down any phase that you want. So here we're coming in at a very fast rate, and we're coming up up until the turn. So here it's turned towards the sun, and now it's going to make its move where it's turned towards where the orbital insertion has to go. We cross the North Pole. You can see the aurora at the North Pole there, which we won't be able to see in real time because the cameras won't necessarily be enabled during all of this. And now we're going to start the burn. So this is what's helping slow us down. We're actually going faster right now. We'll get up to 129,000 miles per hour, but this is kind of shedding some of that kinetic energy and causing it to ultimately enter the orbit. Here it's about halfway through the burn, crossing the equator, and the burn will continue. It's falling underneath the radiation belt there. And then we're coming up on when the burn is complete. Burn is complete, and now we're in orbit. You can see the aurora, and we pass over the South Pole right here. And now we're officially in a very long elliptical orbit. I believe that the initial period of this orbit is going to be 58 days until they get further along into the science part of the mission, at which point they'll be making passes once every 2 weeks, kind of making a flyby, collecting a lot of data during the flyby, and then spending quite a bit of time downloading all of that data to Earth. So following each flyby every 2 weeks, there'll be a massive dump of data, which is kind of an interesting aspect of the mission. Let's look at the different phases of the mission. If we go up here to the Juno mission, we can actually see where we are now, and by clicking on mission phases here, you can actually see all of the different phases of the mission going back all the way to the August launch date. So you can get dates for any of these things simply by hovering over them or clicking on them. So it was launched on, excuse me for my little bit of a cold. You can see it was launched on August 5th, 2011. Another significant date was this deep space maneuver, which we'll talk about in a second, on October 8th, 2011. And this Earth flyby, which occurred May 28th, 2013. Then it was in a long outer cruise getting out to Jupiter, and now we're coming right up on the Jupiter orbit insertion. Then there's another period reduction maneuver. That's coming up in October of this year. That's when it's going to go from that long 58-day orbit around Jupiter to a much tighter 2-week thing. And it's during that the science orbits are going to be occurring all the way up until end of mission, which is actually a planned crash of the craft into Jupiter's atmosphere to destroy it, to prevent it from contaminating the region with any microbes from Earth. In particular, we don't want to spoil the oceans of Europa by possibly seeding it with microbes from Earth. So that's why that crash is planned. Let's go back all the way to the beginning. If we click here, and let's go to an above the sun view, we can actually replay the launch. Now it's going to be very boring to see this at real rate, so we're going to get up to a full week per second to watch the different phases of the mission. So we can see here the Juno is taking off from Earth, and in its initial trajectory, the plan is to just simply get it out somewhere past the orbit of Mars. The engines, the main engines on the Juno craft, are not strong enough to get it all the way out to Jupiter on its own. So at this time frame, October 8th, 2011, they did a very clever thing where the Juno craft made a burn, sending it back towards the Earth, which seems a little bit counterintuitive until you realize that it was designed in such a way that it would always be following the Earth. So the Earth is always kind of this large gravitational body pulling on it, literally acting very much like a slingshot to get it out towards Jupiter. So here's that trajectory adjustment where it kind of reaches the peak of how far it would get out on its own. It's in orbit around the sun at this point. That's the gravitational body most influencing Juno. So here it is kind of falling back towards the sun, but it's designed in such a way that you'll see there's going to be a close encounter, a flyby of the Earth occurring at this time, May 28th, 2013, where Juno is now, this is as close as I can really get to it because of the text sitting right there. You can see how Juno is following the Earth, and that's designed so that the Earth is pulling on Juno for a long period of time, several months in fact. And during that several months of pull, Juno is getting faster and faster. The speed relative to the Earth is relatively low, but the speed in the solar system is increasing quite a bit. So Juno is actually gaining momentum from that move. And that's the move. Now we're past the flyby. We're now in this period here, the outer cruise, beginning November 5th, 2013, going all the way to the approach of Jupiter, which is where we're in now. So this is what gave Juno all of the energy needed to reach Jupiter. Now, the way it meets up with Jupiter is it's also going to be a little bit ahead of Jupiter, kind of allowing Jupiter to kind of catch up to it in a very interesting way. Let me speed up this portion just a bit there's not much that happens during that phase. So here we are now kind of like ahead of Jupiter, and we're now in the period kind of closer to where we are now in January 2016. Let me switch to an above Jupiter view, and we'll get more detail on that. You can see here's the Juno craft going along, and now let me kind of slow it down because now we're going at 1 day per second. Now we're kind of approaching the period close to where we are now. This is back in May, where the two are getting close together to where you have the orbit insertion. So what's really cool about NASA Eyes is it lets you explore at these various levels of detail, what's occurred in the mission going into the past and what's about to occur tomorrow night, which will be very exciting even in the very slow real time to watch. So here we are kind of coming up now. 1 hour per second is way too slow, so I'm going to have to here we are coming up on the orbital insertion, and now it might be actually a good idea to kind of switch to the Juno looking at Jupiter kind of view. Here's that orbital insertion, all the different phases of that taking place. The craft is oriented towards the sun and then makes its move and burns, and all that was very quick, going at 1 hour per second. Maybe I should have changed it down a bit, but you can see that's kind of a sped up version of what's occurring. And we still have the same graphic settings before of these things going. So now we're in our first 58-day orbit around Juno. We make a couple of those. So here we are kind of coming around and getting ready for another one. Let's go at 1 week per second. 1 week per second is probably too fast. Oh no, it would help to actually see where Jupiter is. Yep, so now we're way, 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 way out, far from Jupiter, and we're kind of coming up on our second rendezvous. So this is now August. I think I might have to speed it up just a bit. Oops, there's our... I went so fast that our second rendezvous has already occurred. Now we're moving back out again. Now we're out to September. And then we'll see that the science part of the mission, here it is still making those 58-day burns. There's going to be another move here where it reduces the period. Now you can see it's actually going around once every 2 weeks. So this, let's switch to Juno looking at Jupiter always. So here we are kind of going around once every 2 weeks. At this speed, it's ridiculous to kind of look at it this way. But here's where they're actually going to be performing the science and looking at the various passes. Each one of these passes will reveal more and more. They'll continue to do this all the way out to the end of the mission. So let's go ahead and speed it up and go out to the end of the mission time. At the end of the mission time, what will happen is something a little bit sad, in that the craft will be destroyed. And let's slow it down a bit and play with the view. Juno looking at Jupiter. The craft is basically, after one last pass, will do a little bit of a burn, and then will be designed to just basically lose all of its energy and crash into Jupiter itself. Boom. And Jupiter will be dead. Kind of face up like it is right now, kind of indicating dead. Distance to Jupiter, 10 miles, so that's a crash. And also it's going to be hitting it at a really high rate, 133,000 miles per hour. That's way faster than most meteors hit the Earth, which is usually around 30,000 miles per hour. So this is going to be going at a phenomenally high rate, and this will basically burn up in just an instant. So that, start to finish, is the NASA EYES application, and I hope you enjoyed this demo. And you should also, there's not really time in this demo, you should also be exploring this panel here, the science of Jupiter, which is a lot of fun, where you can learn more about the atmosphere, the interior, the magnetic field, and so on. You can also learn about the craft itself, looking at the instruments on the craft, as well as the spacecraft design itself, the solar panels, the vault, which is in back, that's this thing here, the titanium vault, which contains all of the shielded electronics. And I also want to point out that there's a number of really good YouTube resources to look at. You might want to look at the YouTube resource Exploring Jupiter's Magnetic Field. Last night I was watching this lecture in particular, The Science of Juno's Mission to Jupiter, which was a lecture... oh no, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. This one, the von Karman lecture series, the Juno mission to Jupiter. This is something which one of the lead scientists, an hour and a half long talk that one of the lead scientists gave as part of a NASA lecture series, which I found really informative for learning about the science out there. New York Times has a great resource as well, and in the description of this video, I'll post all of these links so you don't have to try and get them off the screen. The other thing to note is that NASA TV will have broadcasts for July 4th that you might want to tune into. Beginning at 9 a.m. Pacific time, there will be a pre-orbital news briefing as to what's going on in the mission. The main bulk of the orbital insertion coverage will be from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific time on July 4th. That's July 4th in the U.S. It may be July 5th in your time zone. And there will also be coverage of that for 1 hour on Facebook Live. And then there will be a post-orbital news briefing as well. So very exciting times, and I hope you tune in. And if you haven't already downloaded the NASA EYES application, do so now, because Jupiter is looming big, and you want to get that installed and out of the way so you can have this running while you're watching other online things, if you care to watch the insertion burn in the evening. Take care. This is Blind Man Bert signing off, and I hope you enjoyed this demo.